Hello! I wanted to say hi like 5 minutes ago, but I decided to wait. Hello, can you hear me? Sound good? Awesome. Hello, welcome. Welcome back and welcome to those of you who have joined us for the first time. Hello. Welcome, welcome. Well, got some other people coming in, but as usual, I'd like to start on time, so here we go. Yep, let me just go ahead and get that. Hello, Santiago. Let's get some screen sharing going on. Alrighty. So today, as soon as it loads, I'll give it a second. My computer's been acting up a little bit. There we go. Cool. So today, you're here with me for AP Lit once again. Hello, I'm Laura Walton. Welcome back. And welcome back to me. I was taking a break last week, but here I am back again to tell you how to break it down. And I'm talking about a literature prompt, not anything else weird. I'm not going to dance or anything today. So I'm going to tell you how to read and respond to an AP Lit prompt and how they're worded, some different stuff with that. So hopefully that will get you a little less, a little more confident when you're looking at an AP Lit prompt. So as usual, I like to get kind of a gauge. Hello. Of how we're feeling about, first of all, let me ask this, I asked this last time, how many of you have already written an essay for your AP Lit class? You can just type it in the chat. Oh yeah, we got one. Oh yeah. Hopefully by now you have. You've been in class for probably about a month. Wonderful. So lots and lots of has. Has anyone not written an essay yet? And you're not in trouble. I mean, I'm just wondering. Okay, good. Yeah, everyone has written an essay, or you're just hiding, which is fine. Okay. And then my other question is, how many of you have written an in-class essay, like one that you had to write it in like a certain amount of time? So like 40 minutes, you didn't take it home, you like wrote, they gave you the prompt in class and you had to write it. Anyone? Not yet? Okay. Some people do them really, really early. I know that when I gave it like one of the first things just to get people prepared, but it was kind of like I gave them as much time as they wanted, as my kids wanted. So, okay. But anyway, today I'm going to talk about that, how to break down that AP Lit prompt and how to kind of do it. You get faster at it, but how to do it relatively quickly. You get better at it as you keep practicing. So before I get into that, of course, as usual, we've got, if you are not following us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, all that good stuff, and even on Fiveable, the actual site, please do that. You'll get lots and lots of tips. You get to look at this a live stream later on, so it's no longer a live stream, it is a video. And you also get all the materials that I share at the end. It costs less than whatever you're paying for right now. I don't even know what you're paying for. Your Netflix account costs a lot less than that. So, but anyway, it's also free to follow us and all that stuff. So cool. All right. So today we're going to talk about prompt types and tasks. So the three different types of prompts. I think I've gone over it every crowdcast I've gone over or live stream, but it's always important to keep reiterating what the types of prompts there are and then the different things you'll have to do as you're reading them. We're going to talk about finding the meaning in a text a little bit. I'm mostly, again, today focusing on how to read a prompt and what you're trying to get out of that. So a lot of things I'll touch on, but I'm focusing on how to read that prompt. We'll talk a little bit about writing a thesis statement, but that's actually, I think, next week's stream as well. So I'll get into like what a good thesis statement looks like, but more next week. Working on actually writing thesis statements will happen next week. Not with me, but an equally excellent live streamer. We'll look at some examples for how to pull out the different questions you have to answer for Q1, Q2, Q3. Looking at how to find your evidence in your planning just a little bit, and then I'll summarize at the end with some do's and don'ts and some tips throughout. I may move around this. This may not go in order. It may be more logical at the time to do particular things, so you'll see me kind of go all over the place. As usual, those of you that have been here, but also those of you that have not, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a couple things. One of those things is ask a question. So if you've got a burning question as I'm going over things for the live stream, please click that, ask a question, and I will get to it. You can also ask it in the chat and I'll move it into the question box. If I don't get to your question right as you ask it, don't worry, I'm not ignoring it. I'm just going to get to it when it's logical. Sometimes your question immediately is logical too. I love questions. They help move things along and it helps me know that know what you need to know. So please ask away. That's the best part. All right, here we go. So let's break down some AP Lit prompts. So 3 types that you're going to be looking at. And I'm going to ask what your favorite type is in just a moment. So we got Q1. So these are every AP Lit exam goes in this particular order. You don't have to do these in this order. This is just the order that they give it to you, and this is what your teacher probably calls it. A Q1 is a poetry analysis. So they're going to give you a poem to read, probably one you've never seen before. I've never seen one that I have seen before on there. And to analyze it based on a question they're going to ask you. We'll look at 2 examples today. You're going to, so you're answering a question based on that poem. Q2 is prose analysis. It's very similar, except you're looking at either a chunk of a story, so it can be a chunk of a novel, I say chunk, I mean excerpt, but you know what I mean. A chunk of a story, like a short story, a chunk of a novel, or actually a piece of dramatic, like a play. So sometimes you'll get dialogue and sometimes you'll get dialogue and action going on there. So it varies, and none of them really happen more than the other from what I've seen. So I think the last couple times it's been just plain old prose, like a novel, but it's a crapshoot. You can get whatever you want. And then finally 3 is, teachers call this different things. I've called it lots of different stuff in the past. I call it a theme analysis, which is a Q3. And that is when you go and you pick, they give you a theme to analyze, and you get to pick a book that you have read that goes with that theme. So we'll look at some examples of that today too. And I'll go over a little bit more in detail about what the different tasks you have to do for that looks like today as well, because that's going to be very different from reading something on the exam versus taking something you have read on the exam. So, yep. So that is those are the 3 different types of questions that you're going to see on the exam. And again, if you got questions as I'm going, ask away. I love them. I think I got there everything I wanted to there. Okay, so we're going to look at a prompt. And basically, we're going to kind of break down the different pieces of what you're always going to see in a prompt, and then looking at the really, really important stuff that you need to do to be able to actually answer it. Because some people will look at a prompt and they'll kind of freak out, like, what am I supposed to be answering here? Like, oh my gosh, there's so much for me to read. Like, you've already just taken the multiple choice part, and now you're having to read 3 prompts and figure out what you're going to write. So you get a lot of text, but there's ways to kind of skip over some of the text and ways to look at the stuff that's really, really important here. So I'm going to read the prompt to you, and we'll go back and forth to this one, and then we'll do some other examples so you get to look at it. Ooh. Okay, I will get to that question in a moment. All right. So, oh yes, and I will, so I got a question there. I'll go back to that question because that's super important. So I'm going to read the prompt to you and then we'll go back to this. So the prompt is: carefully read the poem, then in a well-organized essay, analyze how the poet portrays the complex relationships among the speaker, the implied audience, and plant life. So this is an example of a prompt from 2 years ago. So I've paraphrased it a little bit. There's a little more detail there. But this is the prompt. So I'm not giving you the poem today. I'm just giving the prompt. So I'm not going to give any of the texts. You may wish to consider the author's use of such literary techniques as syntax, diction, and figurative language. So that's what you get. So you see that prompt, you're like, okay, what do I do with that? And some people will freak out at words like, oh God, what's syntax? Or what do you mean implied audience? Oh geez. So here's how to break this down. So I'm going to go through, I will get to some of that. We'll go through like what appears in every single prompt, what appears in particular prompts, and then what to do with that stuff. Okay, so all prompts, no matter what kinds they are, so Q1, Q2, Q3, are going to ask you to do the following things. Number 1, read the poem or the excerpt. Carefully read the poem. For a Q3, it'll tell you to choose a text to discuss. I'll get more into that when I get to talking about Q3 specifically. So if they're going to ask you to read that poem, so read, duh. You have to read something. So, but take that seriously because it'll say read carefully. They don't mean just read it and understand it. They mean read it, understand it, and analyze it in 40 minutes. That's the fun part. Second thing they'll ask you is write an essay. So this is what I'm talking about, kind of the fluff text that's at the beginning. It'll say, read the poem, write an essay in which you blank. So you're always going to read and you're always going to write an essay. And then finally, it'll ask you in some manner, not sometimes it won't say this directly, but in some manner it'll ask you to use evidence from the text, and it'll almost always say use these literary devices. So you'll notice that those three parts are here. Carefully read the poem, then write an essay, and they ask you the question. We'll get to that question. And then you may wish to consider the author's use of these things. Now, those are the things that are definitely in there. Oops. Okay, we'll get to that in a moment. Cool. And getting your questions, I will get to it in just a moment. So every prompt will ask you to do those things. Many prompts will do the following things, and this may actually answer someone's question. If it doesn't, I'm still going to go back to it. So many prompts will provide dates and authors. Not all of them do that. And usually it'll be more modern stuff that a date will be provided, and an author, one that's not particularly well known. So I would use those to your advantage if you actually manage to get it, because if you know that, if you're, say you're like a history buff and you know things, oh, I know the events that are happening in the 1960s versus the 1860s, quite different time periods. Use that to your advantage. So they will sometimes provide dates and authors. Or if you happen to know an author pretty well and it's an excerpt from their story, fantastic, congratulations, you're lucky. Or if you happen, so if the author is not listed, it's someone who's fairly well known or is completely obscure. But it's usually someone who's fairly well known, like Charles Dickens or Jonathan Swift or Maya Angelou or somebody like that. So sometimes it'll provide dates and authors. Almost always, in some manner, it's going to ask you to describe a complex relationship or something complex. So, and it's usually a complex, like the relationship between these particular things. So my question to you is, before I answer any of the questions, so the question to think about yourself is, what can complex mean? So what kinds of things in literature can be complex? So that's actually my question to you in the chat. What sort of things in literature can be complex? I'll give an example while I wait for some stuff. So when I'm thinking complex, I'm thinking, what is a complex relationship? My example is if someone says, I love you, but, and whatever the but is in that is what that complex relationship is. So it's like, I expect this one thing, but then there's something else that's on the side that's happening. So I see a figurative meaning behind a story. Yes, so that can be something that's complex in the story. Absolutely. What else? What else is complex in a story? Or you can give an example of what does it mean to have a complex relationship? And it doesn't have to be like lovey-dovey relationship. It could be the complex relationship between man versus nature, or something that you're reading. What else can be complex? Let's find out. Yeah, so something, so the way that so I see a tragedy, the way that a tragedy moves itself, especially Shakespearean tragedy, is complex. It starts off with things kind of normal and it starts to go really crappy, and then the complexities kind of end really badly. Yeah. So the way a story, character development. So you specifically, yeah, so you can go specifically like what kinds of development is complex, but like a complex character is going to develop. Yes, definitely. And the character development can come through a relationship, like the complex relationship between a son and a father can be, you expect the father to take care of the son, but the father is constantly absent. That's an example of a complex relationship. You expect one thing, but something else is happening at the same time. I'm trying to think of what else would be complex. It's not a relationship. Usually, for the last like several years, it's been saying things like, describe the complex relationship between these people. So, or these two things, like, or this particular poem, the relationship between people and plants. There's that theme again, man versus nature. So those are different things. So it's almost, a lot of times it'll ask you to define something complex. What I will also say is, even if it doesn't say this, every single thing you read and write about in AP literature is complex. There's no such thing as you reading something simple. First of all, because it's boring. Nobody wants to watch or read anything where nothing happens. And second of all, because it's AP literature, and that's what college lit is like. So it's going to be complex no matter what. So you're going to find something complex in whatever you're reading. Other things that prompts will do, and this may answer someone's question. No, I have not given that. Never mind. The next one is the one. On a Q2 for prose fiction, They will often give you background info because the prose portion will give you an excerpt. It's not ever a full story. It's going to be a piece of a story or a piece of a play or a piece of a novel. So it'll give you a little bit of background information, like the following excerpt is from a conversation between blank and blank about blank. So it'll give you some background info to help you kind of get into that. You want to just you want to use that to your advantage, but you also just want to focus on the text at hand. So don't get too caught up in its background info. And finally, and this goes into somebody's question, it will often give you a laundry list of literary devices to use. So I'm going to go back to the prompt. So you're looking at that prompt and it says, you may wish to consider the author's use of such literary techniques as syntax, diction, and figurative language. So let me answer somebody's question first. And the question is, can you give an example of syntax? Oh, yes, I can. You actually just gave an example of syntax. So syntax is sentence structure. It's basically grammar. It's the way that people they order words in a sentence in order to get a certain effect. So your question, can you give an example of syntax, is an example of an interrogative statement, which is syntax. And it means that you're asking a question. So questions are an example of syntax. If I say directly, syntax is grammar, that's a direct statement. It is a simple sentence, and it's also oh gosh, I can't remember off the top of my head now. Anyway, it's a direct statement. So it's the way that you're ordering words in a sentence in order to get a particular effect. So if you're using syntax in as part of something, as part of your response, or as part of like the literary techniques that the author uses, it's a really, really good thing to use, because then you can get like what the author's tone is based on the syntax they're using, or the message that they're trying to get across. So if they, for example, if they ask a bunch of questions, then they get off this tone of a questioning tone, and they're trying to make you answer something or make you think about something. So hopefully that answered your question. That's an example of syntax. I love syntax, so perhaps in the future I'll do a whole thing on syntax. And I will get to the other question momentarily. But, so back to this laundry list of things. You don't have to use any of those. You have a couple choices when you get to that. Your first choice is to cover up that last part and to say, I'm not even going to look at the suggestions that they give me. I don't know what syntax is. It freaks me out. I don't want to look at it. I don't want to talk about diction. I don't want to talk about figurative language. I'm not even going to look. And you can pick whatever literary devices that you want to use from the poem. That's fine. Second choice is to use that to your advantage. If you happen to know, well, for this one, these are very general too. So diction and figurative language, especially, let's say syntax freaks you out on the exam. So you want to throw that one aside, but you got diction and you got figurative language. Figurative language encompasses a whole bunch of stuff. So even if you find examples of hyperbole and simile and metaphor, those are all figurative language. You use those in your response. So you can use these examples. Sometimes they'll say you can use such examples as hyperbole or diction in the poem to help you write your response. It may help you to have those suggestions, so you know that if you find them, then they are saying, yes, use these things. So you can use that to your advantage. The other thing to know with this too is that you don't need to use any or all three of them, or you don't have to use, like, one paragraph doesn't have to be syntax, one doesn't have to be diction, one doesn't have to be figurative language. You can use as many or as few as you want. That's something that my kids would kind of freak out about, and it's not something to freak out about. They just give you that list as a suggestion. So I have a question here. How similar are syntax and diction? So I will define both of them, and then that will hopefully lead to what the answer is. So syntax is the kind of the order of words that you're using in a sentence, the way that you structure your sentence in order to get a point across. Diction is your word choice. So you use diction to, I mean, it's actually, they go together, but you're not, they're kind of like, they have to work together in order to make the meaning of a sentence. So syntax is the order of words. Diction is the meaning or the particular words that you are using in that sentence. So they're not like the same thing, but they both need each other in order to work. If that makes sense. I'm going to go ahead and answer this one as well, and then I may actually answer it later on as I'm talking too. So the question is, what would you do if you fail to understand an important word in a poem? So I guess it depends on, like, a particular word from the I assume from the poem itself. Well, you want to, well, now that you're asking that question in the first place, the one thing to do is to try to build up your vocabulary as much as possible before the exam. If you misunderstand one particular word, there's a whole other poem to go around to be able to analyze. So one particular word is not going to make you fail completely. It can make you misread the poem if you totally don't understand it. But like I said, there's so many other words in the poem that you can, this is why you practice. So you're able to not maybe completely misread a poem, or that you're looking at so many different things that you're able to recognize some potential pitfalls when you get into a poem. If I didn't answer that question, or there's like a particular way that you wanted, that you're looking for, ask it again, and I will totally answer it. I think that's what the answer was, but go ahead and ask it again. I am not offended if I'm like, you totally didn't answer that. Okay, so keep them coming. Keep those questions coming. I'm going to keep moving on, and I will keep answering questions. Okay, so moving on from these guys. So those are the different things your prompts might do. Now, Q3. Q3 is our fun one. That's the one where you're not getting a particular excerpt from something. You're not getting a poem. You get to pick what book or play or epic, that's like a long Greek or Roman poem that you want to pick for Q3. So they'll give you a theme. So and we'll look at some examples in a moment. And they'll say, like, choose a character from one of these books to show this theme, or choose one of the following works where this symbol appears, or something like that. So some things to know with a Q3 that are specific to Q3, obviously. Oh, there's a lot of things, yes. So, and we're going to talk about all these different things, the different things that you're looking for as you're going through a Q3 prompt. You always want to look at your overall meaning. We'll go into that in a moment. You want to think about, very different from Q1, Q2, because they give you the prompt. You want to think about what novel, epic, or play can fit that task. So something that you have read in the past that can fit whatever that theme is. And I said that and so what can best fit it? So there's some things that can kind of fit it, and you hopefully will read lots of things before you do that. But there's things that will fit even better for it. Then how does the author portray this meaning through the theme or character, whatever? And what devices does he or she use? That kind of, I'll go back to this too, because it makes more sense when we're actually looking at a Q3. So if I go through this quickly, I will go back to this slide. One thing to remember, and I think I said this last time, and I'll keep saying it over and over again, is there will be a list, just like that list of literary devices that they give you. They'll give you a big fat list of books that you can choose from. You don't have to use that list. You can cover up the list, and you can just go with whatever you think fits it, or you can, I suggest you always cover it up no matter what, and you go through that, you think about what book would fit with that theme, and then you check the list and see if your thing's on the list. If it's not, that's okay. There's literally thousands of books that can be on that list, and they're not going to list them all. That would take forever. And that's what I mean down here by comparable literary merit. So you pick a book that is something you ideally read in high school, and ideally read during AP Literature, but hey, I think I've used a book on the exam that I did not read during AP Literature. I used something that I knew a little bit better. You just don't want to pick a children's book like Dr. Seuss or, yeah, Dr. Seuss. There's other books too. If you ever have a question about comparable literary merit, you can ask me. I'll give my email at the end. That's how it works. Okay, so I'm going to go back to that because that makes more sense when I'm talking Q3. Ask away. Okay, so here's when you get your prompt. So your tasks as you're reading this prompt. So guess what task 1 is? Read the prompt. Duh. Otherwise, you can't answer it. So that's task 1. I'm a listy person, and I'm really type A, so I love lists. I love like getting someone breaking it down like I'm a baby because I need it. Hopefully some of you are like that, like, yes, please break it down like I'm a child. Or hopefully no one's thinking that I'm treating like a kid. Number 2, you got to figure out the questions that you're being asked. And that's the next thing we'll do after this is like, how do I figure out what questions I'm being asked in this? Because there's some implied questions and then there's some direct questions. So there's like big little questions going on there. So you got to figure out what questions you're being asked. I suggest that you rewrite the prompt as a set of questions. because it's just, we're humans and we are used to answering, especially if you're in class, you're used to answering questions, and it's easier for you to write a thesis based on questions rather than a statement generally. You don't have to do it that way. If you have a way that works for you really, really well, by all means do it, but I find that my students work better when they change it into a set of questions. You want to read and annotate the text for meaning. If you are not already annotating your texts, you need to be doing that. Get in the habit of doing that. I did not. I wish I had. And then when I was in college, I was sorely suffering in my literature classes because everyone seemed to know what to say and I had no idea. I thought I was really smart. You might be smart, but you may not remember what you're saying. So read and annotate your text. If you can't write in your text, use sticky notes, use a notebook, use your computer, whatever it is, but annotate that text. Get in the habit of actually marking your text and marking things, especially if you're kinesthetic like me. Then writing things down helps you remember stuff, or y'all probably type more than you write. Type, it's okay. And, okay. Whoops. You want to gather evidence to support your response. This is all stuff you were doing while you're like reading the prompt and answering and taking that exam in 40 minutes. So I'm going through this really slowly. This is obviously stuff that you're doing a little bit faster. You want to gather evidence to support your response as you are annotating. So that's why you read your prompt first and try to come up with the questions that you are trying to answer. So as you are reading the text, you are finding evidence at the same time because you have a limited amount of time to be able to go through a text and answer the prompt and write an essay in that short amount of time. And I also strongly suggest reading I forgot to say this, read the prompt before you read the text. So you have a short amount of time. You want to give yourself time to be able to annotate. And you also want to know what they're looking for as you're reading. You want to write a thesis. Always, 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 always have a thesis. A thesis is part of the rubric. The new rubric actually has it as, so the nice thing, this new rubric has, nice for some people, not so nice for others. It has specific, it's categories instead of a holistic grading. Thesis is part of that, and having a strong thesis is part of that. If you don't have a thesis, you miss out on, I forget how many points it is, but it's a pretty good chunk. So you want a thesis and you got to get one. Next week, again, is writing a thesis. And then write your essay. The planning part, you'll notice that most of this is planning. Planning should take up a pretty good chunk of your time because if you plan well, then you write fairly well, or you at least write cohesively. And then if you got time at the end, check over your essay for flow, mechanics, all that good stuff. But we're not going to focus too much on the last last four things. We're going to look at the first three, looking at how to write a prompt. And then maybe we'll write one thesis. I'll show you what a good and bad thesis looks like today. Okay. Ooh, and I will have a question here, but I will not answer it yet. I will answer it when I get to that point. Yes, I will give a good example and a poor example of a thesis statement, definitely. Okay. Yes, any other questions before I'm moving on? Because I'm going through it pretty fast. I do want to look at actual samples because that helps me, and I assume it helps a lot of you too. But if you don't, I will wait like 10 seconds. Or I'll just keep moving, and if I see a question, I'll go back to it. All right. All right, so let's figure out the questions from these prompts. So that's your big fat task. So you get your prompt, you get your paper, you turn it, and you see the prompt there. So here's your prompt. So this is the same one we were looking at before. Oops. So again, carefully read the poem. Then in a well-organized essay, so we've read the poem, we're about to write an essay, and I've highlighted the portion that is the part where you're answering the question. So in a well-organized essay, analyze how the poet portrays the complex relationships among the speaker, the implied audience, and plant life. And I'm going to skip the last part because you don't have the poem in front of you, so you're not pointing out any of those things. So my question to you is, and I'm not grading you or anything, just answer the question. What are some of the questions that you would need to answer in order to answer? How can you break this down into different questions? You can literally change that into a question. But what are the different questions that you need to answer in your essay in order to answer this question or respond to this prompt? And that's for you. Into the chat. Yes, so one of the questions you're answering is, what is the complex relationship? What is this specific complex relationship? Yes, another question is, who is the speaker? Because you need to know who that speaker is in order to portray a complex relationship. Definitely. What other questions? What else you got to know? And there can be also some implied questions in there as well. Aha, yes, who the implied audience is, definitely. You got to know those things. And these are the little questions that you got to know. So these aren't things that you directly maybe answer in your thesis, but they're things that you need to know in order to respond to it in your essay. But I would say the complex relationship, you definitely need to have that in your thesis. What is that complex relationship? What else? What do you need to know? If anything, I'll just wait. What the author is saying about the implied audience. Yeah, so the author's tone perhaps towards the subject, and that could be towards the implied audience or towards the relationship. Yeah, so what are the author saying about the implied audience? Definitely. Anything else? I always ask the setting. What do you mean, the setting? The setting of the... So like specific parts of the poem? That could be one of those things. I might actually put that into a blanket statement. For any question that you are answering, you want to find out the meaning of your poem. So that's question number one, is what is the meaning of this text? What is the meaning and what is the purpose of this text? The prompt will not ask you what is the meaning of this text. That's not going to be asked, but you always need to know that in order to answer the question. Especially for a question like this, if you know what the meaning of the text is, then you're able to find the answers to those questions, like what is the implied audience? What is this author saying about plant life? What is this complex relationship? Oh, this author is saying this about this meaning. This text means this, and I don't have the text in front of me, but it's like I was going to say complex relationship. It's kind of a negative-ish relationship between between man and plant life. So if you know that tone in there and you know that meaning, then you're getting that's the complex relationship, is that you expect the plants to be working for man, but man's actually working for the plants. That's the complex relationship. So it's something that you expect, and then the opposite happens, kind of ironic. Okay, so the different questions, and I'll go ahead and put these up. So some of these you already said. So the different questions that you're answering in this. Number one, what is the overall meaning of the text, and what's the tone, what's going on there? What are the complex relationship between the speaker, audience, and plant life? This is specific to this text, but those are the prompt. And then how does the poet portray these complex relationships among the speaker, audience, and plant life through literary techniques? So make sure you are always looking through it through literary devices in some way. You're not just answering the question, summarizing the text. You are looking at it through, especially for a poem, you're looking at it through literary devices. Like, how does this author portray this through their tone, or through their diction, or through their use of metaphor, or through their whatever's in there. So using those literary devices to prove your point. Okay, so that's figuring out those questions. And if you got questions, ask them. This is the perfect time to ask questions about questions. So we're going to practice a little bit. So if you got questions as we're going, keep asking them. I will pause and answer and be happy to do so. So let's look at some sample prompts and figure out what the questions are. So we'll do the same thing. We're going to look at Q2, Q3, and look at another Q1 as well. And we'll get back to Q3, different things you look at. So here's another prompt. This is a Q1, completely different one, but kind of similar questions. So read the poem carefully, then considering such elements as imagery, form, and tone, write a well-organized essay in which you analyze the relationship between music and the speaker's complex memories of her family. So what kinds of questions are you answering in this prompt? Back to you. And so while I'm getting those answers too, somebody asked me a couple weeks ago, how can you practice writing an essay without writing an essay? This is actually how you can practice doing it, is by looking at prompts. You can get these prompts also on AP Central for free. They like to actually they want to help you. You can get them for free. You can practice actually just writing the thesis statements based on the prompts, or writing the questions, or looking at what different prompts are. So that's one of the best ways to practice. So what are some of the questions that are being asked here? Or I'm sorry, what are the questions that you need to answer based on this prompt? You obviously don't have the poem in front of you. That's okay. You don't look at imagery, form, and tone. You don't have those things in front of you. What do you got to do? Do the same thing you did with the last one. So you got to write an essay, and you got to read the poem. What are you looking for? Yes, so I got how do the strategies the author uses describe the relationship between the music speaker and her family. So yeah, literally turn that around and make it into a question. That's how you can do it. Find the overall, very good, Julie. Yes, find the overall meaning. Always find the overall meaning. So even if it doesn't say it, find it. So yeah, so you find those strategies, or yeah, you can call them strategies, you can call them elements, you can call them whatever you want to, whatever helps you understand that. What do you need to know in order to find those strategies? What are the kinds of, or what do you have to know about this speaker or about this poem? There's lots of different questions in here. I think this one's a little more complex than the last one, at least from just this prompt. I'm going to see if anyone can get it before I go into it. So I'll say it again. Write a well-organized essay in which you analyze the relationship between music and the speaker's complex memories of her family. Don't be afraid to answer. I'm not going to bite. I'm not going to grade you. I'm not grading anything here. It's the beauty of doing a crowdcast is I don't have to grade anything. You want to look at, too, you have to know things like if it's talking about the relationship. So I'll go through some of these questions. If you can type them still. So obviously, what is the meaning of the poem? Always find that meaning, always find that tone. What is the complex relationship between music and the speaker's memories or family? So you got to determine what that relationship is. What is the relationship between music and her memories? Is music in those memories? Is music a big part of it? The answer is yes, if it's in the prompt. But what is that relationship? What is complex about the poet's memories? What are the complex memories? So what is actually going on here? What's all this complexity? Oof. And then you get to the hows. How does this poet portray this relationship through literary devices? Whoops. So the what's and the hows. Lots of what's, and then finally, but you want to make sure that you have a mixture of what's, hows, and then whys, hopefully, as well. But at least if you get to the how, that will get you. If you only have what's that you're answering, then you're not doing what AP Literature is asking you to do. You got to find the hows as well. And the hows are coming through the literary devices that the poet's using. It's like imagery, form, tone. And the whys are, why does this author choose to do this? Why do they want to portray their family through music? What's the point? Okay, that's one example. Let's try another one. This one, so some people excel more at poetry, some people excel more at prose, and some people excel more at the theme question. That's okay. I always like Q3 more than all of them. And then poetry. I'm not as good at prose, personally. I'm still good at it, but I'm not as good at it. Okay, so this is a Q2. So the question is, in the passage below, and then, so this is the text, I paraphrase this because I didn't give the background information because I'm not giving you the text, so you don't need to know that. So it gives you some summary. Consider how the two men confront their uncontrolled emotions and yet attempt to abide by their social norms. Let me actually make that a little bit smaller so you can see that. Well, no, it's okay, you can see tone. In a well-developed essay, analyze how the author explores the complex interplay between emotions and social propriety in the passage. You may wish to consider blah, blah, blah. So only looking at that middle part. The consider and in the well-developed essay. So what are some of the questions that you're answering here? How are you breaking this down into questions? You get this prompt, you're like, oh my goodness, what am I actually looking for? So what are you looking for in this text? And again, don't look at, you will look for things, literary techniques and things, but what are you looking for specifically through those literary techniques? In the chat. That's a very good question. While I'm waiting for people's answers, I'm going to get to this question. So I got a question here. This goes with all of them. Can we interpret the complex relationship differently than others and still get a good score on the test? Yes, you can. you want to find a viable interpretation. So don't try to go aliens on anybody, but there are multiple ways to interpret a text. That's the nice thing about complex relationships and complex texts, is that there's not one way to look at something. In fact, as I was teaching and looking at essays and looking at samples from the past, they often, when I say they, I mean AP Central, College Board, they give examples of interpretations that are not, I don't want to say abnormal, but they're ones that are not the ones that you would expect, but they still work. So yeah, you can definitely get a good relationship. You can get a good score and have a different point of view. Totally. You just got to make sure you can support it with text and don't misread the text. There's a fine line to kind of go there. Okay, so back to my question, you shy people. What questions are you trying to answer in this task? What do you got to find out from this text? Blech. So I'll read it while I'm waiting. I'll wait for you. Analyze how the author explores the complex interplay between emotions and social propriety in the passage. How society affects their reactions. Yes, very good. So you want to look at these. There's two men talking in this. I'll tell you, it's just like a dialogue. Yeah, you want to find out how society affects their reactions. Sure. What else? What else are you looking for? And put it in a question form. I'll give you a little bit. And this is, I understand that this is kind of weird too without the passage in front of you, but you can still pull questions out just by looking at a prompt. But it can be easier with the prompt in front of you, but you still want to look at it before you even read the passage as well. Okay, I won't spend too much time with that. So, different questions that you're answering. Okay, so let me ask you this. What's the first thing you always want to find in your passage that is not stated in here? Who's going to say it first? What do you have to find? It's the first thing you got to find in your passage. Julia said it before. Note. Yes, thank you, Julia. Yeah, main idea, overall meaning. Awesome sauce. Yes, excellent. So you want to find that overall meaning. Always, always, always. It's always weird for me to wait for time because I can't see y'all, so I don't know like who's typing and who's doing stuff. So I'm like, who's actually answering? So I'm so used to standing up in front of a classroom like, yes, you. So if I'm like sitting here awkwardly, that's why. So yeah, number one, what's the overall meaning of the text? Definitely. 2, what's the complex interplay between emotions and social propriety? So I believe someone said that. Then breaking it down into other things. So here's the how. How does the author portray this complex interplay through literary devices? Did I have anything else here? No, I did. And then why. So this goes into the what, how, and why. Why does the author portray this interplay? So you're tying that to the meaning. So this is how you tie it back to number 1. So using that, how he does it and why he does it. I believe, yeah, the author in here in particular is a he. Okay. Ooh, let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Ooh. I will go ahead and answer this question. So the question is, does the AP exam allow the use of a thesaurus during the exam? Alas, no, it does not. You do not get to do anything except take the exam. So this is, again, why you want to study diction as much as you can, build up your vocabulary. But they also understand, too, this actually goes into another point, is that understand that they know that you only had 40 minutes to write an essay. So it's not going to be anything perfect. Nobody writes a perfect essay, even if they have years to write an essay. So that's understandable. You can still get a good score without having the most perfectly varied diction. You want to have as varied as you can, but you can still get a good score without having everything being perfect. So don't worry if you can't use particular sources in the exam, as long as you are practicing looking at prompts and practicing writing them and working to improve it and improving your reading and how you're actually reading into text, you'll be fine. Okay, let's go forward. All right, let's do a Q3. Q3 is different. Okay, so this is an example of what you might see for Q3. So again, this is the one that you get a list of books you can use, or you can use whatever you can use whatever you want. You don't have to go off that list. I almost always use Hamlet. I love it. Or some sort of Shakespeare play, or what else works really well? Invisible Man works really well for a lot of stuff too. So, but you can use whatever is of comparable literary merit, something you read in high school and you know well. So writers often highlight the values of a culture or society by using characters who are alienated from that culture or society because of gender, race, class, creed, or some other reason. Choose a play or novel in which such a character is important and analyze how that character's alienation is significant to the work's meaning. So that is your prompt, and I'm going to go ahead and answer this. And this is actually leading into other questions. So someone asked, does The Great Gatsby always work? The Great Gatsby works a lot. Always, I wouldn't say anything works always. Like Hamlet works almost all the time, but I think last year Hamlet would have been a big stretch, or the year before, not last year. Great Gatsby works for so many things because it's thematically like all over the place, as in it has many, many themes that you can use. So The Great Gatsby works pretty well, and a lot of people love that story. So if you know it well, read it again. Even if you read it last year, read it again. Read any book that you really like again, and go back to it and analyze it like you would for AP Lit. If you also have questions about if something is of comparable literary merit, if something that you're reading is on that level, you can ask me that and I'll see if I can answer it. There's ways to check that as well. You can check the Lexile level at literally lexile.com. I'm going to type that in here. So you can go to lexile.com and check, like, is it on even a high school level? Shakespeare won't appear on there. Shakespeare's always of comparable literary merit. It's just plays are different. But anyway, I'll go back to this. So if you have a question about that, go ahead and ask it. I will get to it. So the question here is, what are you trying to answer? So this is a little, you have to do some other things in your head when you're doing a Q3 that is not, you don't have a text in front of you. You have the text in your head. And you can't bring notes with you. You can't bring books with you. You can't refer to a literal text. So what are some of the questions that you need to answer from this particular prompt, from your text? And you can think about maybe a text that you might use for this. And I would say, actually, The Great Gatsby would work for this one. Nick is a little bit alienated, but so is Gatsby. But what are some of the things that you're looking for in your text or when you're answering this question? There's something else I was going to say while I was waiting too, but I don't remember what it was. That's not helpful at all. Choose a play in the novel in which such a character is important and analyze how that character's alienation is significant to the work's meaning. So what's question number one, of course. And this one, it actually says it. What is question number one always? And what do you got to tie everything back to? I'll just play with this ball for a little bit. These ones are also different too because it gives you a chunk here that's the theme itself. So you got to answer questions about that theme as well. Yes, so you want to answer a question about what is the character's alienation. So I don't know if that was actually a question you're asking me, but that can be a question that you're looking for. What is that character's alienation? How is the character alienated? Or why does the author alienate this character? Yes, very good. And the answer is and the nice thing about this is the answer is really up, not the full answer, but the very vague answer up here is the reason why this author alienates this character is to highlight the values of a culture. Why is he or she alienated? Definitely is a question. Absolutely. You want to answer too, if you're getting to the whys there, is why does the author, or not the why here, I guess it's like, what does the author feel about this piece of culture? Do they agree with it? Do they disagree with it? If they're alienating somebody and showing that this person's a good character, then that generally means that this author does not like the society this character lives in because they are different from the crappy society. The overall, there we go, there's overall meaning, beautiful. Yeah. So this one, I think you answer, your you're kind of juggling more stuff because you're first of all trying to pick something that works. But this is, you want to do this before you even pick some. Well, I wouldn't say that. You can do it at the same time, but you might want to answer these questions before you even pick a work. So if you can't answer the questions like, why is this character alienated? Why does the author alienate this character? What is the meaning of this? If you can't answer what the meaning of this text is, don't pick it. Then you can base your choice off of that. I don't even think I finished my sentence properly there. That's okay, whatever. Okay, so these are questions. Yeah, what is the overall meaning or theme of the text? So in this case, when you're looking at overall meaning, and this, again, this prompt gives you a clue to it, how does the author feel about their society's values? Do they agree with them? Do they disagree with them? Sometimes it's they agree with the values and this character's a piece of crap and they hate them. Most of the time it's this character is the person, the author likes this character and wants you to like them too and wants you to hate the society. This often happens with like dystopian novels. This is a really good prompt for dystopian novels, by the way, like 1984, or I don't think I don't think it's comparable literary merit, but I can't remember. How does the character represent the theme of alienation in this text? So you have to, you're not going to explain it, but this is a way that you need to know the answer to this question. How, in what ways does this character represent alienation? What are the values of the society that the author's highlighting through this character? Because you're answering that first question too. The overall meaning is this. And then what is the author saying about the values through this character? How does she do this? So it's not, Q3s are often not simple questions of, I say the other two are more looking for this particular theme. You're kind of broadening out a theme in a Q3 because it is a theme question. You're broadening out to more of the why and the how than the other two. That might be just my opinion though, but you're looking at, if they give you this theme, then you have to expand on everything that's in this prompt. So hopefully that makes sense. So that's Q3. That's the one that you can probably practice most easily on your own, especially if you're reading something of comparable literary merit right now. Practice Q3. Q3 can be really, really daunting for people, but my kids tended to do best on Q3s because they got to pick the text and they liked it. So yeah, okay. We're going to go through quickly. So that's really what I'm going to focus on mostly is like actually going into the text. So now I might get to some other people's questions in here. This is what I'm going to get to, the thesis question. So how do I find meaning in a text? So how do I even get to the point here where I'm looking at things like, oh my gosh, I have to find what the author's saying about the values of this character. Why am I looking for that? This is what AP Lit wants you to be able to do. It wants you to look at a text and be able to look at it in a larger context instead of just a standalone text where it's, oh, cool, that was a nice story. They want you to look at it, oh, this author wrote this story because they wanted to make a larger example of something or larger point about something else. Okay, so two things I always tell my kids. Number one, all roads lead to tone and irony. If you can find the tone, you can find the meaning, because if someone is being if you know what the author is feeling about a particular subject, then you found the subject. So, and I go with irony as well, because if an author is being ironic, then you know that they think the opposite, like they're being ironic in the text, they mean the opposite of what they're saying, meaning that they probably don't agree with whatever they're displaying. A lot of things they put on the AP exam are ironic, and that can be really difficult to find. So if you're always looking for irony, then you will find irony. And you will find tone is always a good thing to look for, because that, again, that helps you find the meaning. And then finally, something to remember too is in serious literature, nothing happens by accident. The author didn't just put it there for fun. It's like making a painting. If you bothered to paint it or you bothered to write it, then it's there for a reason. That symbol is there whether you like it or not. So two things to always remember. How to find and determine meaning in a text. I'm going to go through this really fast because this is mostly about reading a prompt, but this helps you like take the prompt and make it meaningful to you. So when you're reading, and this is when you're on doing the test, so this is especially when you're reading a poem or a piece of prose on the test, but also as you're reading your Q3 stuff, you always want to consider that tone. You want to consider the subject matter. Why is there a comma there? I don't know. But the subject, so the meaning. The speaker, is it the author or someone else? So oftentimes it's not the author, it's a persona that they've taken on. And always the audience. So that goes kind of with that first poem, that it asks you about speaker, audience, and tone and the subject matter. So those are all things you want to consider no matter what. You want to determine deeper meaning. Again, everything is complex. And then you want to look at how those literary devices create that tone and meaning. Easier said than done. Again, I'm not going through how to do this. I'm telling you like strategies to help you be able to do this. And you're always looking for meaning, once again, despite what the question says. So let's see if I got anything. No. Okay. So that's finding and determining meaning. Writing your thesis. So this actually goes into the question. So I was not ignoring it. Here we go. So the question is, what is an example of a good thesis statement for you? And this is going to take a little bit of time to get to, but that's okay. Not too long, though. So writing your thesis. So this is why I have you break down the questions, or why you want to break down your prompt into questions, because your thesis statement should answer all of the questions the prompt asks. So if you ask the questions like, we came up ones like, what is the meaning of the text? What is the relationship between plants and people and the audience and the speaker? This is what I'm going with that very first prompt. And so you have to tie those things together. Like, what is the author's meaning in writing this poem? And what's the relationship going on? And why are they doing that? So you want to answer all those questions. You want to model your thesis to fully answer the questions. So not just kind of marginally answering the questions or ignoring the questions. Don't do that. You need to answer all those questions. Some of them you may not need to answer directly. So your thesis shouldn't say things like, the meaning of this text is blank. Don't do that. You want to just, I'll show you an example of what I mean in a second. Your thesis should be specific and make an argument. Argument is, it's not like you're making an argumentative paper. When I say argument, I mean you are taking a stance, like as in like, I am interpreting this text this way, and here is how I'm going to do it. So argument doesn't mean like you're arguing with somebody. It means that you're making a point. Don't just repeat or reword the prompt, because that's not going to help you, and the readers can see right through that. So I'll show you a non-example and an example. So here you go. So here's a non-example. Don't do this based on that other prompt. The poet portrays the complex relationships between the speaker, audience, and plant life through diction and figurative language. Now my question to you is here, why is that a non-example of a thesis? Why is that not something you want to write? Looks fancy, doesn't it? What has the person done? That was me who wrote that, so it's not you're not making fun of anybody but me. I made this example up, but I get this kind of thesis a lot. What's wrong with that? Yeah, it doesn't mention what type of complex relationship. You want to be specific to that prompt. What else is wrong with it? Make fun of my thesis. It's terrible. It looks cute. It's not. What else is wonky with this thing? So it's not specific. I don't want to be silent for too long. It is way too general. Yes, it is. Too many. Yeah, and there's too many like nebulous ideas. So like, I'm not seeing anything about. So first of all, I don't mention what any complex relationship is. Congratulations, you just repeated the prompt. Don't do that. I'm not seeing anything about the speaker audience. Like, who is the speaker? Who is the speaker? Who is the audience? What are we talking about here? It doesn't tie anything to the overall meaning. You are right. Absolutely. There's nothing about any meaning in here. This doesn't tell a reader that you know what you're talking about. This tells them that you know how to reword a prompt. So, and it also, this is a pitfall that a lot of people fall into at the end as well. They'll say through diction and figurative language. Now, you need to actually mention what kinds of diction that the author's using, and you got to mention the types of figurative language. Those are both really, really, really broad terms. So here's an example of a paper. This is a thesis that was on a paper that got an 8 on the 9 scale from last year. So almost not perfect score. There's no such thing as a perfect score, but they almost got a 9 on the essay. So it's a little longer. Actually, it's much longer. And I actually cut some stuff out of it for space wise. But in the poem, the speaker warns the audience not to underestimate the clever machinations of plants. The speaker argues this point through sinister diction, personification of plant life, and direct addresses to the audience. So instead of being really, really vague and saying complex relationships, they mention what that complex relationship is. They're warning the audience not to underestimate the plants. And then they tell you how this person does it. The speaker argues this point through sinister diction, personification, so that specific type of figurative language, and direct addresses to the audience. So that's an example of a pretty decent thesis. Remember again, you only got 40 minutes to write, so nothing's going to look perfect. If this looks wordy to you, it is a little bit wordy. That's okay. They still got an 8. So that's an example of a good thesis statement, or a decent one. So that's that. Okay. I think I'm going to go through this. So again, keep asking questions, going to move on. All right. So finding evidence and planning some pitfalls that you don't want to fall into. Haha. So number 1, don't summarize the text or the prompt. So don't do this. So don't do the thesis statement where you summarize the prompt and just turn it around. Don't do that. It doesn't tell the reader anything. And it also doesn't, most importantly, it doesn't help you, because then that doesn't help you plan your essay. You also don't want to summarize the text, so don't feel like you need to tell the reader what the text is about. Even if it's a Q3 and you're like, oh, what if this person hasn't read it? They have. They'll find someone who has. Don't worry about it. Don't think that you have to write a book report. In fact, there's always something on there that says it does not summarize the text or does summarize the text. And if you do that, it's going to lower your score. So don't summarize the text. Take every example that you use should be specifically answering the question that you are being asked. Number 2, answer the question. So these are pitfalls. So some people will answer the question without direct evidence. Don't do that. If you have the text in front of you, so the poem and the prose for Q1, Q2, take literal quotations out of there and break them down and talk about what they're doing. So don't do that, or don't not take direct evidence. For a Q3, remember as much as you can. Obviously, you don't have the book in front of you. You don't need direct quotes. If you can remember a quote, great. If you can remember almost the whole quote, you can paraphrase it. Great, that's fantastic. They know that you don't have the text in front of you. Use as specific examples as possible. And number 3, a pitfall is answering only one part of the question. So again, usually people skip that deeper meaning part. Don't do that. You want to tie it back to the whole meaning of the text, because otherwise it's a really flat thesis. It doesn't, again, AP Lit is not about just reading and understanding a text. It's about understanding it and tying it to something bigger than the text itself. So yeah. Okay, I'm almost done. I got this. So here's my summary for you. So do's and cans. You do need to answer all parts of the question, so make sure you do that. This is why you break down the question into smaller questions, so big questions, little questions. You do need to make sure you're answering the question that is being asked. This is, again, why you break it down into questions, so you are not answering something completely off base or trying to go somewhere crazy. So make sure you're answering the questions that are actually being asked of you. You can assume that the reader knows the book or play you're discussing. Again, you don't need to summarize anything. You need to just take examples from the text and use it. That's sometimes a difficult balance to find. That's sometimes easier said than done. Hopefully we'll have something that will help you be able to do that. And then you do need concrete specific examples for each type of question. Haha, yes, somebody got my Animal Crossing joke. Thank you. The pitfall. I was hoping somebody got it. Ooh, I have a question here. And the question is, so back to pitfall. Pitfall can be a synonym for plot summary, right? It can be an example of pitfall is doing plot summary, yes, but the pitfalls are just things that you don't want to fall into. I am so happy somebody got my Animal Crossing reference. Feels like a huge amount of exemplars spend time summarizing the text and still earn a 789. Sometimes it looks like that. So there's a fine line between summarizing and finding examples, especially for a Q3. Excuse me. And your teacher is also probably going to be a lot harsher on you than perhaps the exam will too. So you're getting better as a writer, but you also just don't want to feel like you have to summarize the text. You want to be able to just dive in and analyze a text, not just summarize it. So yeah, some of those exemplars do look like people do summarize them. And again, remember that you have 40 minutes to write, so they're not going to be perfect. They're not going to be things that you're like, oh my God, this is the best thing I've ever read. No, these are not the best things you've ever read, but they are adequate for what they're doing. So yeah, there's some summary going on. But don't do what they do, then you'll get a better score. Haha. And finally, don'ts. You don't need to use the literary devices suggested. You don't have to. You don't need to choose a work off the list for a Q3, ever, ever, ever. You can if you want. See your work, great, it works for it. You don't need to summarize a story or poem. You don't have to. You don't, in fact, don't do that. Summary is not generally good. And you don't need quotations for Q3, but they're nice if you can remember them. So, yeah. All right, that's it for me. So as a couple of reminders is next week, talking theme and thesis statements and going into more detail about how to write thesis statements with Candace Moore. So I'll be not here next week, but I'll be here the week after. And we're going to talk about reading for evidence and defending a claim. So I'll go into more detail about finding that evidence and ideally talking about how not to summarize stuff. So that will be good. So that's a nice segue into the next part. As usual, my contact, I am at Ms. Walbach on Twitter, and I'm at lauralwaltonteacher@gmail.com. If you ever want to get in contact with me, again, if you're not following us at Fiveable, then do so. And I will see y'all next time. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful Thursday, almost Friday. Yay! You are welcome. Bye.